Hey everyone, welcome back to One Geeks Craft. I'm Nicole and today we're going to be making the map from Skyrim. Just kidding, we're going to make a giant. After about 2 weeks of file creation, I printed out a paper template so we could really see the scale of this map. It was truly unreal.
Put it back on the table.
I want to hang it on the wall. Since this map is huge, we have to kind of start working in stages. So what I'm doing right now is cutting out as many pieces as I can, keeping the laser running, and then moving through the steps of varnishing the wood, painting the engraves, and peeling the masking tape. So the material we're using is actually new to us. It is from Craft Closet. Now this material comes unfinished, so we do have to put the masking tape on, varnish it after the fact, and move through that process, which is something we normally don't have to do on our other maps, but I wanted to give this stuff a try, so we'll see how it goes.
There were 28 total landmass pieces that were arranged to fit on 14 cherry plywood boards. Each piece took 1.5 hours. In total, there was about 21 laser hours into this project.
After each piece was pulled from the laser, I sealed the engraves with a layer of polyacrylic. This was to protect the wood from sucking in all the black paint that I needed to apply. After the poly was dried, I applied the black primer. I used Vallejo black primer because it's runnier than most paints and it flows really nicely into all those nooks and crannies. After the paint was dry, I started to pull the tape. I found that tape pulling was easiest if done as soon as possible. The boards that went through their finishing stages all in one night were truly the easiest to deal with. If the boards had a few days with the tape on them, it took a little bit of extra oomph to get it off. Once all the tape was removed, I put a coat of poly on the wood to seal it. The first layer of poly brought out the roughness in the wood, so I would sand back each piece with 220 grit sandpaper and then give it one more coat of the stuff. Then these were finally ready for paint. The most annoying part of any One Geeks Craft map is all the trees, so I enlisted the help of some of my friends. Wes at Geeksmithing and Ben at Make for Life Workshop did all the heavy lifting when it came to painting the trees, and I continued to work through the polyacrylic stages. There were a lot of pieces.
I like this though. Hey Ben, come over to our house. So here's something to do and then stick a camera on it.
Oh yeah.
No pressure.
Are you okay with being recorded?
I'm totally fine.
Good. And if you're on camera, you're gonna get a shout out. So like, there's that.
At this point, not all the pieces had polyacrylic applied, but they were all cut out, so it was time to make a frame. We took everything down to the basement and mapped it out on a sheet of plywood. We decided to go with something similar to a paint canvas frame. Using 1x2s and corner brackets, I started to assemble the frame. We decided to use steel 90-degree brackets and screws rather than pocket holes because they were much simpler. This side of the map will never be seen, so we didn't need to hide our jointery. Once the frame was assembled, I added some glue and put it in place. Screws held the plywood board centered on the frame, and of course, Eos made sure everything was being done to code.
Thanks to Terry's help, we finally have this large frame to work with. Now what's left to do is get it all ready for resin. I'm going to be filling all of the screw holes with some silicone, and then I'm going to be painting the wood back blue. Once that's all done, I'm going to be gluing each of these individual pieces into place, and then painting all of the mountains. There are a lot of mountains on this. Luckily I had my friend's help with all the trees, but I have to do all the mountains on my own because I am a particular kind of crazy and want it done a very certain way. So I'm going to be spending the next couple of days getting this all ready to have resin poured into it. Let's go. To attach the landmasses to the plywood, I used some E6000 and 1/2-inch pin nails. E6000 is forgiving and takes a bit to dry, which is why it came in handy because I had to shift the pieces around quite a bit to make this work. I basically created the most frustrating puzzle known to man. So if you attempt to make this, have fun, and I'm sorry. Once they were finally set, I pinned them all in place. Finally, it was time to paint everything. This entire painting process took around 20 hours to fully complete. I started by giving all the mountains a touch of gray. Any mountains that were not completely snow-covered got a brown undercoat. Somewhere in this blur of a painting session, I painted the forest with the standard green and added some darker green on top. Later, these were finished by re-outlining those black lines and adding a lighter highlight. It was at this point that I realized that there were still about 100 trees that were left to be painted. This was the moment where it truly dawned on me how big this map really was. There's an area on the map that for some reason is more autumn than the rest of the continent, so I added some autumn trees to the mix. I couldn't figure out how to add the green paint evenly using standard brushes. Then I realized I could use one of my old makeup sponges and just kinda, I don't know, smush it in place. It seemed to have worked. I used 2 different colors of greens for the southern parts of the map, and then whites and grays for the northern areas. In the autumn area, I used some yellows and reds to do the same effect. I had to repaint some of the engraves with black paint after I was done using the sponge, because the sponge really did push the paint into the lines. Once the landscape was painted, I moved on to the towns. I used some paint pens to paint the silvery bits, red paint for all the roofs, and tan paint for all the buildings. I finished the paint job by painting in all of our little dragon boys. There's 4 dragons hidden across this entire map.
After the paint was done, we had 2 more steps, vinyl and resin. The vinyl portion was simple. All locations were labeled with white vinyl, and the towns got their signature crests. These were made from 1/8 inch white MDF and black vinyl to stand out from the rest of the decals. The crests were affixed to the map using double-sided tape. After the vinyl was complete, we attached the black frame, added silicone to the seams, and taped the edges with tuck tape to reduce the chance of a resin leak.
So the map is all ready to accept resin. And what we're gonna do is take about a gallon of resin and pour it into here. I plan on using this cup mostly because it's our biggest resin mixing cup, and filling about 12 ounces of one part and another 12 of the other part, and just keep pouring as we go.
We were pouring a lot of resin, so we suited up with our respirators and gloves for safety. We used Alumilite Amazing Clear Cast Resin. It's a 1-to-1 ratio resin and really simple to use. Nicole added a combination of different blue pigments and inks before mixing everything together. After mixing for about 3 to 4 minutes, Nicole poured each pint out. The calculation said we would need about 0.8 gallons of resin. We ended up using less than that. We used the calculator as an estimate to make sure we had enough resin, but thankfully we had more than we needed. It's hard to gauge how much is needed on these obscure shapes, but it is always good to have a plan. Since the rivers were wide enough, Nicole was able to use a 30 milliliter cup to pour the resin in. There were some areas that needed a syringe, but it wasn't as necessary as one can be on small maps. Once all the resin was poured, we cleaned up all the small drips and added the final swirls. Nicole used the heat gun to pop any bubbles that came up, but luckily it was pretty bubble free.
Lastly, we poured the resin into the tiny map, because for some reason I thought it would be really funny to have an intro shot with a big map and a little map. Really, we did this because we do need to test the files that are available to Patreon members. We don't expect people to want to make the big one, but people will make the small one, and I want to make sure it worked right. Files available in the description below.
We want to give a huge shout out to all our Patreon supporters. It's because of your support that we are able to make awesome stuff like this, so thank you guys. If you want to make either the big map or the little map, you can by joining our Patreon. Links to the files as well as the tools and materials will be in the description below. Thanks for watching. See you all next time.